Hi everyone, Gundam Fax here for a ninth and brand new episode of our special edition Law of the Universal Century. Today we're going to the mysterious era taking place before the 1 Year War in an attempt to answer a particular question, which is... Yep, in this video we are going to present the origins of Zeon mobile suits and the developing line which led to the creation of the Zaku series. In this video, we will exclusively address the mobile suits of the regular UC continuity and not the origin continuity. This means no VAF, no Bugu, because they are from a distinct timeline, even if they have often a counterpart in the regular UC. Now, time to dive in our subject. The year is Universal Century 68. The group of colonies located the farthest from Earth, S.U.I.T or Munzo, declared its independence from the Earth Federation and its rebirth into the Principality of Zeon. For the people of S.U.I.T, this unrecognized independence was a synonym of great joy, but what they didn't realize was the dramatic consequences it would have for the entire Universal Century. Soon enough, it became clear that Federation and Zeon could never coexist peacefully. For the Federation, the very existence of Zeon was intolerable as it loosened its grasp over the colonies and fragmented its authority and power. On the other side, the ruling Zeon family, the Zabis, backed by the local aristocracy, craved the richness of Earth, and secretly, the independence of Zeon became nothing more than a desperate pretext to usurp the Earth Federation of its ruling title. However, the ruling caste of Zeon was aware that because of their fewer resources and population, they were outnumbered by 10 to 1. Furthermore, total victory would mean size Earth itself, and without proper sea or real ground in the colonies, creating an adequate aerial naval force would be impossible without a very powerful and adaptable wonder weapon. Thus started Zeon's 10 years long race to arms, with the final results being the mobile suits. UC-71. Active research to create this wonder weapon finally started. To achieve this, the Army Weapon Development Bureau was created, and to assist it, local private companies were solicited, with 3 of them actively answering the call. These companies were respectively Zeonic, specialized in space pods, Zymad, specialized in propulsion systems, and MIP, specialized in beam weaponry. Very quick, all 3 of them started their own development ideas and submitted them to the Development Bureau. In the initial stage, all 3 of them proposed several dozens of concepts, but in the end, only 2 of them were retained and presented to the top brass of the Principality. The first was MIP New Creation, the forefather of all mobile armors, the MIP X1. 25 meters long, this decisive weapon had been created by updating a pre-existing design, which was a spacecraft using the asteroid mining. This fighter had been overhauled with additional verniers, which granted it higher mobility, and it received a prototype jet engine, enabling it to hover inside the colonies. Additionally, the MIP X1 was outfitted with a powerful mega particle cannon, which had an output similar to a battleship main gun. Its contender, the Zaku I, aka the AMBAC Space Pod, was a creation of Zeonic and was essentially a retrofitted and highly modified space pod that the company had used for years. In comparison with the MIP X1, the AMBAC Space Pod seemed like a joke, and its only assets, a mono-eye camera and 2-limb, fell assets to win the competition. However, those who thought like that were proven completely wrong. With an intelligent combination of thrusters and weight distribution, the AMBAC Space Pod could capitalize on what Zeonic called the active mass balance auto control, which used the reaction generated by the movement of a limb at high speed to control the altitude of the spacepod. The result was a highly maneuverable vehicle with high mobility and with a far lower fuel consumption than a regular mobile weapon. With a single limb movement, the AMBAC Space Pod could rotate by 180 degrees in less than 3 seconds, while the MIP-X1 could only achieve this with the help of 2 verniers and its rear thrusters. These characteristics made the AMBAC Space Pod a revolutionary design, and during a demonstration, Zabi itself praised the vehicle, effectively putting Zeonic at advantage over MIP, but also Zymat, who was now really lagging behind its two adversary. Still, a whole portion of the Zeon top brass was fonder of the MIP-X1 and its big cannon, and Zeonic was ordered to continue research and create something that would completely outperform the MIP-X1, else it would be the one to be definitely adopted. With this middle success in mind, Zeonic officially started the ZXA series, and development restarted, at last. Immediately, Zeonic engineers had come to the conclusion that it was the AMBAC abilities that had made the AMBAC Space Pod so successful, and they quickly realized that a humanoid-shaped weapon with 4 limbs for active AMBAC control had an enormous potential. Following this direction, they continued the ZXA line, and a few months later, they completed the successor model, the ZXA-2. Dubbed the Humanoid Walker, this new creation was a drastic departure from the AMBAC Space Pod, and was closer to what future mobile suits would eventually resemble. Vaguely similar to its descendant the Zaku I, the Humanoid Walkers were nonetheless too crude to be called a mobile suit or even a robot, and it was more of a walker than anything else, as it was meant for work under gravity. Even worse, it didn't even have arms, but only balancer weights to stabilize it during experimental runs. Despite that, it was not a scarecrow machine, and its structure did not rely on a simple box assembly, but on many curved surfaces for an enhanced rigidity. Additionally, it replaced the fully mechanized limb articulation of the AMBAC Space Pod with a pulse system, which enables smoother limb movement and would be inherited by all future mobile suits. Still, it was far from being an autonomous machine, and its numerous holes on the body are a testimony that it needed to be connected to an outside generator to remain active. As soon as it was completed, Zeonic moved to the next stage of the ZXA line, and with the help of the Professor Torin Minovsky and other civilian companies, they managed to create a refined variant, the ZXA-3. The ZXA-3 was essentially a more advanced ZXA-2, but with arms and pinchers serving as ends. In addition, its power sources were not anymore external, but downsized in the form of a back-mounted high-capacity generator which enabled it to work unassisted. Still, the ZXA-3 was nowhere perfect, and the trial tests initially proved disastrous. It took Zeonic 2 years to eventually refine it into a decent form, and this resulted in an increase in size from 10 to 14 meters. In UC-73, the ZXA-3 was once again remodified, and was finally presented to the Development Bureau. Among the new additions were a large armor frame and the replacement of the end pinchers with regular hand manipulators. Once completed, it still took several months for the ZXA-3 to complete the walking test without crashing, but it eventually ended up being a success. Upon presentation to the Development Bureau, the ZXA-3 quickly gained the ungrateful moniker of Crabman, and upon seeing it, Zabi mocked the design, which he found ridiculous. Yet, the Crabman easily surpassed the MIP-X1, and after a few debates, it was decided that the Crabman line would be the one to be adopted by the army. This was the first success of mobile suits over mobile armor, and it ended up the mobile armor development line for almost a decade, with the MIP-X1 going back to storage. Zeonic then remained the ZXA-3 as the Mobile Suit 01, MS-01, and Christianized it as the first ever produced mobile suit. Still, the Crabman was far from being a real war machine, and its mobility and propulsion left much to be desired. In that same year of UC-73, the mobile suit line continued with the creation of a model designed to fix some of the Crabman flaws, the MS-02, aka the High Mobility Test Type. As its name indicates, the high mobility test type was a sort of upgraded version of the Crabman, with enhanced mobility it achieved through the removal of the additional armor layers and increased propellant capacity. Aside that, not much is known about the Mobile Suit 02, but it seemed this particular model was the first one to succeed in obstacle parkours, and that it was later the first one to be able to use the hand manipulators for more complex tasks, such as picking up cubes. Later that year, Zeonic completed a new successor, the MS-03. They would eventually go to call the prototype Mobile Suit, and much later the prototype early Zaku. Like the MS-02, the MS-03 is mostly shrouded in mystery, but the 8 Mobile Suit Team bonus video gave us information about it. The MS-03 was the real first introduction of the Zaku series, and the first unit to be really considered for live combat. Unlike the MS-01 and MS-02, the MS-03 was enlarged by a few meters and now stood at approximately 17.5 meters. This increase in size enabled Zeonic to install a reactor inside the torso, though it was far from being optimal. In the end, Zeonic manufactured 4 of these units, with some being orange or the blue, and with one of them having a lighter frame than the others. The MS-03 soon passed the space trials, and now the Zaku series could start. In the origin continuity, the VAF serves as the equivalent of the MS-03, but there are some differences between them. First, the VAF is far more advanced and more effective than the MS-03, and its production was limited to only one prototype, while the MS-03 underwent a 4 units production. Aside that, the other differences is that the VAF was produced in UC-74 and not in late UC-73, and that it already used a diverse arsenal of weapons, arsenal that the regular continuity Zaku would struggle to acquire, as we will now explain. The year is UC-74. After a few months spent improving the MS-03, Zeonic presented their brand new addition to the Mobile Suit line, the MS-04 prototype Zaku. In comparison with all its predecessors, the MS-04 was in a whole other league. While it was developed from the MS-03, improvements over the propulsion system and thrusters had given it twice the mobility of the MS-03, something which was astonishing since no armor was scrapped to increase mobility. Actually, the steel alloy armor frame had been almost completely redesigned, which resulted in a bulkier look which offered better resistance against ballistic or superheated weapons. Yet, it wasn't this mobility nor these improved defenses which make the prototype Zaku a completely revolutionary machine. Since the Zaku I, miniaturization of the power source had proceeded smoothly, and the final result of these 3 years of hard labor finally paid. Through its cooperation with the ZAS company, Zeonic was able to obtain what they called the ZAS X7, which was a miniaturized thermonuclear reactor which could be integrated inside the torso of the MS-04 and power the whole suit without the need of external power sources nor additional backpack generators. The concept of having a small thermonuclear reactor as a sole power source truly paved the way to the success of mobile suits as a whole, as the backpack could now be used exclusively to mount propulsion systems, making the suit faster and more agile. With these assets, the prototype Zaku proved itself to be the first of the mobile suit line to be not just considered for live combat, but actually capable of it. To achieve this, the MS-04 received a brand new signature weapon, which was a 100mm machine gun, dubbed the Zaku machine gun. This weapon is actually the direct predecessor of the infamous 120mm Zaku rifle, which would go to become a standard weapon in Zeon arsenal. Despite all of that, the MS-04 was, like most of its predecessors, a cripple in its own way. First, the prototype Zaku was extremely costly, and it was all but fit for mass production. Secondly, Zeonic engineers had been kind of anxious about protecting its arms, and they had basically designed the MS-04 with so much armor on the arms, it had difficulties moving them at all. Aside that, the MS-04 proved during simulation that the 100mm machine gun was not enough to deal with warships, and that another more powerful weapon was needed. At the end of the day, the MS-04 still needed to be refined for a possible mass production plan, and Zeonic was forced to continue development. In the Origin continuity, the prototype Zaku is replaced by the similar looking but chunkier Bugu, which saw almost the same problems we talked earlier, but was still put to limited production, something the prototype Zaku unfortunately never reached. For 1 year, Zeonic engineers dedicated themselves into refining and simplifying the design behind the prototype Zaku, and all this hard work eventually paid off, as in May UC75, Zeonic presented their new breakthrough, the MS-05A, aka the Zaku I Type A, later known as the Zaku I Early Type. In comparison with the MS-04, the Zaku I Early Type was more streamlined, lighter, and it replaced the ZX-7 reactor with the more powerful ZAS M88B. This enhanced generator was, like the ZAS-X7, an almost unlimited power source, but more stable and which could be air-cooled or hydrogen-cooled rather than being exclusively hydrogen-cooled. Overall, the Zaku Early Type remained cheaper than the prototype Zaku, easier to pilot, and it also introduced some small assets which made big differences. First, its mono-eye camera was not anymore the only camera system, and it worked in conjunction with other cameras disseminated all over the armor, which gave the pilot a better visibility. Secondly, it was outfitted with infrared and laser sensor, which would have facilitated communication. Now, because of Minovsky effect blocking both types of communication, these two new additions became kind of worthless, or at least not as effective than what they hoped it could have been. Finally, the last addition was an early version of the Zaku bazooka named the Initial Type, which corrected the low firepower of the MS-04. When Zeonic presented the Zaku I Early Type to the Development Bureau, they were met with a slight problem. The Zaku I Early Type was not anymore alone in the competition. Through all these years, Zaimat had been able to perfect their own mobile suit, the EMS-04 Zudah. Stat-wise, both suits were not too far from each other's, except the Zaku I was 1.8 times cheaper. However, Zaiman's mastery over propulsion systems had provided the Zudah with the revolutionary Jupiter engine, which was a backpack engine relying on zinc and lead fusion rather than helium-3 combustion for propulsion. This engine gave the Zudah unprecedented mobility, and for the first time, Zeonic and the Zaku series felt threatened. Still, Zeonic was able to resolve this crisis by leaking to the top brass that the Jupiter engine became unstable if overused. During the official flight demonstration of the Zudah, Zeonic accusation proved correct when the Zudah disintegrated in front of a whole bunch of Zeon top officials. With the Zudah out of the picture, the Development Bureau approved the mass production of the Zaku I Early Type into what would be known as the Zaku I B-Type, which is your average standard Zaku I. Before that, 27 early types had already been produced, and most of them would live long enough to see the start of the 1-year war. Aside these 27 A-types, an unknown but far more important number of Zaku I B-types were manufactured. Production of the B-type continued for the 2 following years, until Zeon possessed a real small army of mobile suits. In UC77, Zeon top brass concluded that a more powerful mobile suit would be needed to fight the Federation on a more equal footing, and thus they decided to stop the production of the Zaku I, but not before soliciting Zeonic for a successor version. Almost immediately, Zeonic presented the new model they had been working since the completion of the Zaku I B-Type, the new entry to the Zaku series, the MS-06A, the Zaku II A-Type. Also known as the Zaku II first mass production type, this mobile suit was the first representative of the Zaku II family, and it distinguished itself from its future brethren by its two round shoulder armor, which used the pauldron of the Zaku I rather than the future shoulder shield or spiked shoulder. To be fairly honest, the Zaku II first mass production type was more of a glorified upgrade of the Zaku I rather than a fully new and revolutionary machine. Still, it had a superior overall performance because of its increased armor and improved thrusters. Other than that, it replaced the ZAS M8B reactor with a slightly upgraded version, the ZAS M9, and it also introduced external power cables for a better overall responsiveness. In August UC-77, production of the Type A Zaku II officially started at the Zeonic Zone City factory. At that time, Zeonic expected this mobile suit to be the end result of all these years of labor, and the model which would be definitely adopted by the Zeon army. However, things didn't proceed as planned. Rear Admiral Kisilia Zabi, which had become the new director of the Army Development Bureau, considered the design to be insufficient to meet her expectation, and for one particular reason nobody could have anticipated. Basically, Kisilia argued that should the Federation ever develop mobile suit on their own, the A-Type would be left without options than its fist in close combat, and this was a risk that couldn't be overlooked. With this argumentation, the already built first mass production models were relegated for training duty, and Zeonic was forced once again to go back to the drawing board. In a matter of weeks, they came back with the Zaku II B-Type, which was an almost modified Zaku II first mass production type, but which was this time equipped with a solid new plunge-rate weapon, the Ito. This weapon was an axe-like weapon which could be superheated to increase its sharpness and use the thermal energy of the thermonuclear reactor delivered through the Zaku ends. Now, the B-Type may or may not have been the model introducing the use of the spiked shoulder and shoulder shield, but since we can't say that for sure, it remains unsure. In September UC-77, the Zeon top brass confided to Zeonic that the Principality would soon enter wartime readiness, and that the incoming war would likely see the Federation ships employing nuclear missiles, and that the Principality should be prepared to do the same despite limited stocks. Zeon I officers had hopes in a particular concept, which was Zaku's using nuclear warheads, and asked the company if it was a feasible concept. To meet such demand, Zeonic redesigned extensively the Zaku II A and B type, and by the end of the month, they brought their new success in front of the general staff. This new mobile suit was the Zaku II C type, also known as the Zaku II Early type. Equipped with a spiked shoulder for ramming attacks and a shoulder shield for defense purposes, the Type C had a higher versatility than its predecessors, but as was not even the tip of the iceberg. The Type C was effectively designed to work in conjunction with a special nuclear bazooka derived from the initial Type bazooka, and which could be used in two firing modes. The first one simply fired nuclear warheads, which enabled these Zakus to damage multiple salamis in a single hit, as the Federation used formation with a 25 km distancing its ships. The second mode was the actual precursor of the GP-02 nuclear bazooka, and condensed the nuclear blast into a controlled destructive fire with shorter range. With the perspective of a nuclear-based warfare, Zeonic engineered the Type C with a triple-layer composite armor made of a mix of lead and super hard steel alloy, supposedly to improve the pilot protection against surrounding nuclear blast and radiation. To reduce the chance of leaks, the cockpit was surrounded by a layer of anti-radiation liquid, which increased the pilot's chance of not catching cancer in the short run. Now folks, I honestly think the lead layers were a pretty bad idea, because instead of cancer, Zeon pilots would have died of lead poisoning. But hey, that's not the topic of today. Because of all these measures, the Type C gained a width largely surpassing its predecessor, but at least it protected the pilot. Soon, Zeon top brass approved the Type C, and in January UC-78, its mass production officially started. 1 year later, the 1-year war began, and at that time, the Type C made the bulk of the Principality forces. During the 1-week battle, this machine and its nuclear bazooka committed many atrocities, but this dark history was overlooked because a certain number of top aces, such as Char Aznavour, Johnny Raiden, or Shin Matsunaga, popularized the machine due to their outstanding performance with it during the Battle of Loon. On January 31, UC-79, Zeon signed the Antarctic Treaty, and this rendered the Zaku II early type obsolete, as its complex radiation shielding systems were now useless as the nuclear bazooka was banned alongside all nuclear weapons. Zeonic replied to this by creating a model without all these protections and a new generator, which turned to be the lighter Zaku II F-type, aka Monseigneur, the regular Zaku. Successively, the F-type would spawn many other Zakus and other mobile suits as well, but that's outside today's topics, and now... And we have now completed today's topic, and I hope you all like it. This will be all for today's video, but stay tuned for future lore content delivered on the same channel. Hit the like button, and most importantly, comment and subscribe, as it will really help the channel to flourish. So long, fellow new types, until the time of our next special edition.